The stars had been quiet for 2,000 years in the vast darkness between galaxies. The conclave of 13 worlds had built something beautiful and rare, a civilization of peace, where 13 different species lived together in harmony and trust. Admiral Kethra stood on the observation deck of Monitoring Station 7. Her forearms folded behind her back as she watched the endless black of space stretch out before her. Her scaled skin reflected the soft blue light of the control panels, and her vertical pupils scanned the star charts with the calm confidence of someone who had never known war. The Velthari were the founding species of the conclave, and Kethra was proud of what her ancestors had created. No battles, no invasions, no bloodshed, just trade and art and science flowing freely between worlds. Some younger officers complained that their jobs were boring, that nothing ever happened out here on the edge of known space. Kethra always smiled at such complaints, because she knew that boring was a gift. Boring meant children grew up without fear, meant families stayed whole, meant no mother had to bury her young. She would take boring over excitement any day. "Admiral," called a voice from behind her. She turned to see Lieutenant Vormesh hurrying toward her, his tentacles moving quickly across the floor. He was young, barely past his third molting, and his skin still had the bright purple color of youth. "What is it, Lieutenant?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. "The long-range sensors have detected something strange," he said, his voice shaking slightly with what might have been excitement or fear. "Something strange is not a useful report," Kethra replied, walking toward the main control room with slow and steady steps. "Tell me specifics." Vormesh struggled to keep up with her longer stride as he spoke. "A vessel. Admiral, at least, we think it is a vessel approaching from beyond the outer rim." "Beyond the outer rim?" Kethra stopped walking and turned to face him. "There is nothing beyond the outer rim except empty space for 100 light years." "Yes, Admiral, that is what makes it strange." She resumed walking, her mind already working through possibilities. A lost cargo ship, perhaps, or some explorer who had wandered too far from home. She reached the control room and found her crew gathered around the main display, their faces lit by the glow of the holographic projection. "Report." She commanded. Senior Technician Yelenash looked up from her station, her single large eye blinking rapidly, a sign of confusion. "Among her species, we detected an energy signature approximately 2 hours ago," she said. "At first we thought it was a sensor error because the readings made no sense." "In what way?" "The object is moving at speeds we have never recorded before," Yelenash continued. "Our fastest ships can travel at factor 12 in hyperspace. This object appears to be moving at factor 40 or higher." Kethra felt the first small stirring of unease in her chest. "That is impossible," she said flatly. "Our understanding of physics does not allow for such speeds." "I agree, Admiral, which is why we assumed it was an error. But," Kethra prompted, "but the object has now decelerated and dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of our system." The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a small point of light that should not have been there. Kethra leaned forward, studying the image with growing concern. The object was definitely a vessel of some kind, though its design was like nothing in the Conclave's records. It was long and angular, built with harsh lines and sharp edges that seemed almost aggressive in their shape. Every ship in the Conclave was built with curves and flowing forms, designed to look as peaceful as the civilization that created them. This ship looked like it had been built by someone who expected to fight. "Have you attempted communication?" she asked. "Yes, Admiral, on all standard frequencies with no response." "What are its dimensions?" Yelenash hesitated before answering. "Approximately 3 kilometers in length." The control room went silent. The largest ship in the unified fleet was barely 1 kilometer long. This unknown vessel was 3 times that size, and it had arrived from nowhere. traveling at speeds that should not exist. Energy readings? Kethra asked, her voice still steady despite the cold feeling spreading through her body. That is perhaps the most concerning part. Yelenash said quietly, the energy signature of this single vessel exceeds that of our entire defensive fleet combined. Before Kethra could respond, every alarm in the station began to scream. At once red lights flashed across every surface, and the holographic display pulsed with urgent warnings. The words that appeared made her blood turn to ice. Incoming threat identified. Human warship approaching. Stand ready. Human? She said aloud. What is a human? She turned to her crew, seeing her own confusion reflected in their faces. Search the archives, she ordered. Find any reference to this species. Vormesh's tentacles flew across his console, his movements frantic. Nothing, Admiral, he reported after several long moments. There is no record of any species called human in any of our databases, not in first contact records, not in ancient histories, not in legends or myths. How can our systems identify something we have no record of? Kethra demanded. No one had an answer. The ship continued its approach, moving with slow and deliberate purpose toward Velthari Prime, the capital world of the Conclave, home to billions of people who had never known war. Open all communication channels. Kethra commanded broadcast on every frequency. Channels open. Admiral. She stood straight and spoke clearly into the receiver. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Kethra of the Unified Fleet. You have entered Conclave space. Please, identify yourself and state your intentions. We mean you no harm and wish only to communicate. Silence answered her. The ship kept coming, Admiral. Yelenash said, her voice barely above a whisper. The vessel has just deployed some kind of energy field around itself. Our sensors can no longer penetrate it. Kethra watched the approaching ship and felt something she had never experienced in her long career, true fear. For 2,000 years, the Conclave had known peace. And in that peace they had grown comfortable and perhaps careless. They had told themselves that the universe was mostly empty, that the dangers of the ancient times had passed, that they were safe. But now something was coming, something they did not understand, something with more power than they had ever imagined, and it was heading straight for their home. She looked at her crew, young officers who had trained for emergencies that never came, who had never heard weapons fire except in simulations, who had never watched a friend die in battle. They were looking at her now, waiting for her to tell them what to do. She wished she had an answer. Send word to the High Council, she said finally. Tell them we have visitors. The unknown ship grew larger on the display with each passing moment. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Kethra understood that the long peace was ending. Something new was entering their lives. Something powerful and mysterious and completely unknown. Whether it would bring destruction or salvation, she could not say, but nothing would ever be the same again. Ambassador Yoanori had negotiated treaties between species who breathed different atmospheres, who perceived time at different speeds, who communicated through colors and sounds and chemical signals that most beings could not even detect. She had spent her entire life learning to understand those who were different, to find common ground where none seemed to exist. But as her small diplomatic shuttle approached a massive human vessel, she felt something she had rarely experienced in her long career: uncertainty. The ship was even larger up close than it fitted on the sensors. Its hull was covered in strange markings and what looked like scars from weapons. Fire-old damage that had been repaired but not hidden. These beings had been in battles, real battles, and they had chosen to keep the evidence visible that told Yaonori something important about who she was dealing with. Ambassador, her pilot said nervously. They are opening some kind of door in the side of the ship. She watched as a section of the hull slid apart, revealing a lit interior. Take us in, she ordered. The shuttle passed through the opening and landed on a metal floor. Inside a chamber, large enough to hold dozens of ships, as the engines powered down. Yellenori took a deep breath and prepared herself for whatever was waiting outside. The shuttle door opened, and she stepped out into the human vessel. The air was different here, heavier somehow, with a strange scent she could not identify. The lighting was brighter than she was used to, and the temperature was warmer than the standard on Volturi ships. Standing before her were three figures, unlike anything in the Conclave archives. They walked on two legs and had two arms, with soft skin and shades of brown and pink. Their faces had two forward-facing eyes, a single nose, and mouths that curved upward at the corners in what she later learned was called a smile. Ambassador Yellenori, one of them said in perfect Volturi. "Welcome aboard the Perseverance. I am Captain Sarah Chun." Yellenori blinked in surprise. "You speak our language," she said. "How is that possible when we have never met your kind before?" The captain's smile widened slightly. "We have been listening to your communications for several weeks as we approached. Your language is complex, but not impossible to learn. Several weeks of listening, and they had already mastered a language that took Volturi children years to learn properly." Yellenori filed that information away carefully. "Please," Captain Chun said, gesturing with one arm. "Let us walk and talk. I imagine you have many questions." They walked through corridors that hummed with energy, past equipment that Yellenori's trained eye could not even begin to understand. She noticed that the few crew members they passed all had the same look in their eyes. Not hostility, but something else. Something deeper, exhaustion perhaps, or sorrow. Or both. "Your ship is impressive," Yellenori said carefully. "How many crew does it require?" 47, the captain answered. Yellenori stopped walking. 47? She repeated. "A vessel of this size in our fleet would require thousands. Human technology is somewhat different from yours," Captain Chun said simply. They entered a large room filled with chairs and tables, clearly designed for meetings or meals. The captain gestured for Yellenori to sit, and she did so, studying the human carefully. "Let me be direct with you." "Ambassador," Captain Chun said, taking a seat across from her. "We know your people are frightened of us. We arrived without warning. Our ship is more powerful than anything in your fleet, and you know nothing about us in your position. I would be frightened too. And should we be frightened?" Yellenori asked. The captain was quiet for a long moment before answering. "No," she said finally. "We did not come here to harm you. We came here because we had nowhere else to go." "You are refugees?" "In a manner of speaking. We have been traveling for a very long time, fighting a very long war. We hoped to find a place where we could rest, perhaps trade for supplies, and continue on our way." "A war," Yellenori said slowly. "Against whom?" Something changed in the captain's eyes, a shadow passing over her face like a cloud blocking a sun. "An enemy you do not know yet," she said. "An enemy we have been fighting for 300 years. 300 years? Yellenori could not hide her shock. How can any war last so long? "When your enemy does not want territory or resources or power," Captain Chun said quietly. "When your enemy wants only your complete destruction. The war does not end until one side is gone." A cold feeling settled in Yellenori's stomach. "And this enemy, are they still pursuing you?" The captain did not answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, and Yellenori noticed for the first time that they were covered in small scars. "We did not flee from them," Captain Chun said finally, her voice soft but steady. "We finished it." The words hung in the air between them. "You finished it," Yellenori repeated. "You mean you defeated them?" "I mean we ended them, completely and permanently. There is no more war because there is no more enemy." Yellenori felt the weight of those words pressing down on her. This small crew, this single ship, had fought a war for 300 years and won. They had destroyed an enemy so thoroughly that nothing remained. What kind of beings were capable of such a thing? I can see the question in your eyes. Captain Chun said with a sad smile. You are wondering if we are monsters. You are wondering if beings who could do what we have done are beings you should allow anywhere near your peaceful worlds. The thought had occurred to me. Yalanori admitted. The captain nodded slowly. That is fair. Let me tell you something about humans. Ambassador, we are very good at fighting. It is not something we are proud of. But it is true. When we are threatened, when the things we love are in danger, we become something terrible. We do not stop. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We fight until we win or until we are all dead. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting Yalanori's directly, but that is not all we are. We are also builders and artists and dreamers. We write music and tell stories and love our children. We have fought our war and we are tired of fighting all. We want now is to find somewhere peaceful, somewhere beautiful, somewhere we can remember what it means to live instead of just survive. Yalanori studied the human captain for a long moment. She had spent her life reading people, understanding the truth behind their words. And she saw no deception in this woman's eyes. She saw only honesty and exhaustion and a desperate hope. I will take your words back to the conclave. Yalanori said finally, I cannot promise they will allow you to stay, but I will speak in your favor. That is all we ask. Captain Chun said, a chance, nothing more. As Yalanori prepared to leave, she turned back with one more question. Captain, your war lasted 300 years. How many of you were there when it began? The captain's face grew still. 12 billion humans lived on our home world when the war started. She said quietly, now there are 47 of us left. Yalanori felt her heart stop. 12 billion reduced to 47. And still they had won. She walked back to her shuttle in silence, her mind filled with new understanding of the beings called humans. They were not monsters. They were survivors, and somewhere deep inside her, a voice whispered that the conclave was very fortunate these survivors had come in peace. The grand chamber of the conclave was filled with representatives from all 13 worlds, their voices rising and falling in heated debate that had lasted for 3 days now. High Counselor Methril stood at the center of the chamber. His ancient shell cracked with age, but his mind still sharp. He had led the conclave for nearly a century, and he had never seen his people so divided. They are dangerous, shouted Representative Kolvex of the Third World, his feathers bristling with anger. We have all seen the reports. Their single ship carries more firepower than our entire fleet. They have admitted to fighting a war of complete annihilation, and you want to welcome them into our space? They have shown no aggression toward us. Ambassador Yalanori responded calmly. They have been nothing but cooperative and honest. Honest about being killers. Kolvex snapped back. That does not make them safe. It makes them more dangerous. The debate continued. Voices overlapping and tempers rising. Methril raised one withered claw for silence. And slowly the chamber grew quiet. We have discussed this matter at great length, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Perhaps it is time we put the question to a vote. Shall the humans be granted temporary sanctuary within conclave space, or shall they be asked to leave? Before anyone could respond, the great doors of the chamber burst open. A young officer ran in, his face pale with terror. Forgive the interruption, High Counselor, he gasped. But our sensors have detected a massive fleet entering our space. The humans have called for reinforcements. Kolvex shouted immediately. I warned you this would happen. No, the officer said, shaking his head rapidly. The fleet is not human. It is something else, something our historical databases have classified as extinct for 2,000 years. The chamber fell silent. Methril felt a cold dread spreading through his old bones. What fleet? He asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. The Cavith Swarm. High Counselor, they have returned. Chaos erupted in the chamber. The Cave of Swarm was not just history, it was nightmare 2,000 years ago. Before the founding of the Conclave, the Swarm had swept through this region of space like a plague of locusts. They consumed everything: ships, stations, worlds, entire civilizations. The ancestors of the Conclave species had barely survived, hiding in the shadows while the Swarm moved on to other hunting grounds. For generations afterward, children had been raised on stories of the Swarm, warned to always be watchful, always be ready. But as centuries passed without any sign of them, the stories had faded into legend, and the legend had faded into myth. The defensive fleets had shrunk. The weapons had grown outdated. The training had become routine, and now the myth had become real again. How many ships? Methril asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Vanguard alone numbers over 3,000 vessels. The officer replied, they are heading directly for Velthary Prime, estimated arrival in 16 hours. 3,000 ships. The entire unified fleet consisted of perhaps 200 vessels, and most of those were designed for patrol and cargo escort, not combat. They would be destroyed in minutes. Evacuate the civilian population, Methril ordered, trying to keep the despair from his voice. Begin emergency protocols, contact all member worlds. Aye, Counselor, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see a human standing in the doorway, Captain Sarah Chun, flanked by two of her crew. She had not been invited to this session, but no one moved to stop her as she walked toward the center of the chamber. We detected the Swarm at the same time your sensors did, she said calmly. They had been following us across the galaxy. We had hoped we had lost them, but it appears we were wrong. This is your fault. Kovacs screamed at her. You led them here. You have doomed us all. The captain did not flinch. You may be right, she said, and for that, I am sorry. But blame and apology will not save your world's action. Will what action? Methril asked. Your fleet cannot stand against 3,000 Swarm vessels. They will tear through your defenses like they are not even there. I know, Chun said, which is why we are offering to handle this ourselves. Silence fell over the chamber. Handle this yourselves? Yelanori repeated. One ship against 3,000? The Perseverance was built for one purpose, Captain Chun said, her voice steady and clear. She was built to fight the Swarm, my crew, and I have spent 300 years doing exactly that. We know their tactics, their weaknesses, their patterns. We know how to beat them. You expect us to believe that one ship can defeat a fleet of 3,000? Kovacs demanded. Captain Chun turned to face him directly, and something in her eyes made the feathered representative take a step backward. When this war began, she said quietly, humanity had a fleet of 10,000 ships and 12 billion people. The Swarm came at us with numbers beyond counting. World after world fell, billions died. We retreated and regrouped and fought and lost and retreated again. And through all of it, through 3 centuries of blood and fire and death, we never stopped learning. We never stopped adapting. We never stopped fighting. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. The Swarm is powerful, she continued, but they are also predictable. They have not changed their tactics, and all the time we have fought them, they swarm there. Enemies with numbers, overwhelmed defenses, consume everything, but they have never faced anything like the Perseverance. They have never faced humans who have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Methril studied the human captain carefully. He had lived a long time and had learned to recognize many things in the eyes of others. Fear, he understood, and anger, and greed, and ambition. But what he saw in Sarah Chun's eyes was something different. A terrible certainty. A cold and absolute determination that went beyond courage into something he had no name for. Why would you do this? He asked. You could run your ship as fast enough to escape. Why would you risk everything for worlds that are not your own? For people who were just debating whether to send you away?" The captain smiled, and there was sadness in it, but also something like peace. "Because we are tired of running," she said. "Because we've spent 300 years watching everything we love burn, because somewhere in this universe there has to be something worth protecting. Something worth dying for. Your worlds are beautiful and peaceful and full of life. If we cannot save that, then what was the point of surviving this long?" She straightened her shoulders. "We are going to fight the swarm," she said. "We are going to destroy them. Or we are going to die trying. All I ask is that you keep your ships back and let us work." The chamber was silent. Methril looked at his fellow counselors, seeing the same mixture of disbelief and desperate hope on their faces. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Captain Chun, we accept your offer. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you." The captain's smile widened slightly. "We stopped believing in gods a long time ago. High Counselor, we learned to believe in ourselves instead." She turned and walked out of the chamber, her crew falling into step behind her as the doors closed. Yalinori moved to stand beside Methril. "Do you think they can really do it?" she asked quietly. "One ship against 3,000? The old counselor was silent for a long moment before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "that we are about to learn why the swarm followed them across an entire galaxy. And I think the swarm is about to learn why they should have stayed away." The Perseverance moved through space with a grace that seemed impossible for a ship of its size. Admiral Kethra watched from the observation deck of her flagship, surrounded by the captains of the unified fleet who had gathered to witness what would either be a miracle or a massacre. The swarm vanguard filled the sensors, 3,000 vessels, each one bristling with organic weapons that could tear through metal like it was paper. They moved as one, a single terrible mind controlling countless bodies, advancing toward Velthary Prime, with the patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. And between them and the world they meant to consume stood one ship, one human ship. "This is madness," muttered Captain Velros of the destroyer Righteous Dawn. "They will be destroyed in the first minute." Kethra said nothing, but she found herself gripping the railing so hard that her claws left marks in the metal. The human vessel had taken position at the center of the defensive line, directly in the path of the approaching swarm as the enemy fleet drew closer. The Perseverance powered up its weapons. What happened next would be burned into Kethra's memory for the rest of her life. The human ship did not wait for the swarm to attack first. Instead, it surged forward, accelerating at speeds that made Velthary pilots gasp in disbelief. The Perseverance dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, and as it did, space itself seemed to tear apart around it. Weapons the Conclave had never imagined opened fire, beams of energy that bent around obstacles to find their targets, missiles that split into hundreds of smaller projectiles, each one seeking out a different enemy fields of force that crushed swarm vessels like insects beneath a boot in the first 30 seconds. Over 200 enemy ships were destroyed. The swarm responded with the mindless ferocity that had made them the terror of the Tartarus galaxy. They swarmed toward the human vessel from every direction, pouring fire into its shields, trying to overwhelm it with sheer numbers. The Perseverance's shields flared with each impact, but they held, and the human ship kept killing. Kethra watched as the vessel twisted and spun through the enemy formation, never staying in one place long enough to be surrounded. It moved like nothing she had ever seen. Not like a machine, but like a living thing. A predator in its element. Every time it seemed trapped, it found a way out, and every time it moved, more swarm vessels died. "This is impossible," Velros whispered. "No ship can fight like that." But the evidence was right in front of their eyes. 1 hour into the battle, over 1,000 swarm vessels had been reduced to debris. The Perseverance had taken damage. Kethra could see scorch marks and hull breaches appearing across its surface, but it was still fighting. Still moving, still killing with that terrible efficiency. Then the swarm changed tactics. A group of their largest vessels broke away from the main engagement and positioned themselves around the human ship. They did not attack. Instead, they opened their hulls and released thousands of smaller creatures directly toward the Perseverance boarding pods. They are trying to take the ship from the inside. Kethra realized aloud. She expected to see the human vessel try to flee, to pull back from the engagement and deal with the boarders instead. The Perseverance continued fighting as if nothing had changed. The boarding pod slammed into its hull, and the creatures within began cutting their way inside. What happened next was captured by sensors and transmitted to every ship in the Conclave fleet inside the Perseverance. The 47 human crew members were waiting. The footage showed corridors lit by emergency lighting, filled with smoke and the sound of alarms. The swarm creatures burst through the walls, huge insectoid monsters with razor-sharp limbs and armor-plated bodies, each one twice the size of a human, and the humans fought them hand to hand. Kethra watched in horrified fascination as human crew members engaged the invaders with weapons and tools, and sometimes nothing but their bare hands. She saw a human female, small and slight compared to the creatures she faced, dodge beneath a slashing limb and drive a blade through the joint of a swarm soldier's neck. She saw a human male tackle one of the creatures to the ground and hold it there while another crew member shot at point blank. She saw wounds that should have killed, arms torn, blood flowing, bodies broken, and humans who kept fighting anyway, who refused to fall even as they should have been dying. What are they? Valros asked, his voice shaking. They are human, Kethra answered quietly. The boarding action lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, every swarm creature that had entered the Perseverance was dead. The humans had lost 3 of their crew, 3 more names added to the billions already gone, but the ship was still theirs and outside. The battle continued. The Perseverance emerged from the swarm of enemies that had tried to overwhelm it. Bleeding atmosphere from a dozen breaches, but still firing, still moving, still impossibly alive. The remaining swarm vessels, fewer than 1,000, now began to pull back, their collective mind finally registering something it had never experienced before: fear. The Perseverance did not let them escape. It hunted them down one by one, chasing them across the system with relentless determination. By the 6th hour of the battle, the vanguard of 3,000 swarm vessels had been completely annihilated. Not one enemy ship survived. The human vessel limped back toward Valtteri space, its hull torn and burning in a dozen places. Kethra received a transmission audio only. The visual systems apparently damaged. Vanguard neutralized, Captain Chen's voice said, rough with exhaustion. The main fleet will arrive in approximately 4 days. We will be ready. The transmission ended. Kethra stood in silence, trying to process what she had witnessed. 1 ship against 3,000, and the 1 ship had won, but at what cost? The humans had lost 3 more of their precious 47, and their vessel looked like it might fall apart at any moment. And the main swarm fleet was coming, a fleet that dwarfed the vanguard by orders of magnitude. Admiral, one of her officers said hesitantly, what do we do? Kethra thought about the humans, about 44 survivors of a dead civilization, alone on a dying ship, preparing to face an enemy that had followed them across the stars. She thought about the peace of the Conclave, the 2,000 years of safety that had made them soft and unprepared. She thought about what kind of beings could watch those humans sacrifice everything and simply stand by. Contact the High Council, she said. Finally, tell them that the unified fleet is going to help repair the Perseverance. Admiral, Valros objected. Our ships do not have compatible technology. We do not know how to help them. Then we will learn, Kethra said firmly. We will give them whatever they need, materials, energy, labor, whatever it takes to get that ship ready to fight again. She turned to face her officers, and there was something new in her eyes, a fire that had not been there before. The humans stood alone against impossible odds to protect worlds that were not their own, she said. They did not ask for help, they did not expect it, but they are going to get it anyway, because that is what civilized beings do. That is what the conclave was supposed to be about. She looked out at the distant shape of the Perseverance, drifting toward them like a wounded warrior returning from battle. We cannot match their weapons, she admitted. We cannot match their skill, but we can stand beside them. We can show them that they do not have to be alone anymore. For the first time in 2,000 years, the conclave prepared for war, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the main swarm fleet continued its approach, unknowing that everything was about to change. The shipyards of Velthury Prime had never seen anything like this. Thousands of workers from all 13 worlds labored around the clock, following instructions from human engineers who patiently explained technologies that should have been impossible. Materials flowed in from every corner of conclave space rare metals, energy crystals, components stripped from civilian vessels whose owners had volunteered them without being asked. The Perseverance sat in the center of the largest repair dock, surrounded by scaffolding and service pods like a wounded beast being nursed back to health. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the observation platform above the repair bay. Watching her ship being rebuilt, she had not slept in 3 days. But she could not bring herself to rest, not when so many strangers were working so hard to save her vessel. You should eat something, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Admiral Kethra approaching, carrying a container of something that smelled surprisingly good, Velthury nutrient paste, the Admiral explained, handing it to her. Not as appealing as it sounds. I am afraid, but it will keep you alive. Chun accepted the container with a tired smile. Thank you, Admiral, for this and for everything. Kethra moved to stand beside her, looking down at the Perseverance. My ancestors fought the swarm 2,000 years ago, she said quietly. The stories say they were monsters, unstoppable, inevitable. My people hid in caves and prayed for death to pass them by. She turned to face the human captain. But your people did not hide. Your people fought them for 3 centuries, and I am trying to understand how that is possible. Chen was silent for a long moment. We are not special, she said finally. We are not stronger or smarter or braver than anyone else. We just refused to accept that we could not win every time we lost a battle. We learned from it. Every time they destroyed a fleet, we built a better one. Every time they thought they had beaten us, we came back. She looked out at her ship, at the alien workers swarming over its hull. Humans have a saying, what does not kill you makes you stronger. The swarm killed billions of us, but the ones who survived became something new, something harder, something that would not stop until the war was over. And now? Kethra asked. Now that it is over? Chan's expression softened. Now we want to remember how to be something other than soldiers. We want to build instead of destroy. We want to live instead of just survive. She paused. But first, we have to finish this one last battle, then maybe we can finally rest. The 4 days passed faster than anyone expected. The Perseverance was rebuilt, not just repaired, but improved, with conclave materials filling gaps where human components had been destroyed. The humans worked alongside alien engineers, sharing knowledge freely, teaching anyone who wanted to learn, and as the ship came back together, something else happened as well. Admiral Kethra volunteered her flagship to fight alongside the humans. Then Captain Velros volunteered his destroyer. Then another ship. And another, until over half the unified fleet had pledged to stand with the Perseverance against the main swarm fleet. You do not have to do this. Chun told them at the strategy meeting. Your ships are not designed for combat on this scale. You will take heavy losses. We know, Kethra replied, but we have decided that some things are worth the risk. The human captain looked around the room at the faces of beings she had known for less than a week, beings who were preparing to die beside her. Why? She asked. Her voice rough with emotion she rarely showed. It was Ambassador Yelenori who answered, because you showed us what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. She said, for 300 years. You protected a species that no longer exists. You kept fighting for a humanity that was already gone, not for survival. Not for victory, but because giving up was simply not something you could do. She stood and approached the captain. You taught us that civilization is not just about peace and prosperity. It is about being willing to sacrifice for others. To stand against darkness, even when the odds are impossible. That is what we want to be. That is what you have inspired us to become. Chun closed her eyes for a moment. And when she opened them, they were wet. Then let us make it count. She said. The main swarm fleet emerged from hyperspace. On the morning of the 5th day, 30,000 vessels, 10 times the size of the vanguard, spreading across the system like a dark tide. The collective mind of the swarm saw its enemies and felt what passed for confusion. Instead of the single human ship it expected, it found a fleet, the Perseverance at the center, surrounded by over 100 conclave vessels. The smaller ships were primitive compared to the human vessel, but they flew in formation with a determination that the swarm had never encountered from these species before. All ships. Chun's voice came over the fleet-wide communication. This is Captain Chun. The enemy outnumbers us greatly. Many of us will not survive this day. But I want you to know something. She paused. And when she continued, her voice was steady and clear. For 300 years, I have watched my people die. I have seen worlds burn and civilizations fall. I have carried the burden of being the last of my kind. But today, for the first time since this war began, I do not feel alone. The conclave ships tightened their formation around the Perseverance. Today, we are not human, and Velthury, and all the rest. Chun continued. Today we are one people, one civilization, standing together against the darkness. Whatever happens, I am proud to fight beside you. We are proud to stand with you. Admiral Kethra replied, now let us show them what we can do. The battle that followed would be remembered for generations. The swarm attacked with everything they had. 30,000 vessels crashing against the Allied fleet like waves against a cliff. The Perseverance led the charge, cutting through enemy formations with the deadly efficiency that had destroyed the vanguard around it. Conclave ships fought with a ferocity no one had expected, captains who had never fired a weapon in anger giving orders to attack. Crews who had trained only for emergencies, performing acts of impossible bravery. Admiral Kethra's flagship drew fire away from the Perseverance when its shields flickered, taking damage that crumpled entire decks, but keeping the human vessel protected. Captain Velros rammed his destroyer into a swarm command ship, destroying both vessels but breaking the coordination of an entire enemy squadron across the battle. Similar stories played out sacrifice and courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Ships fell on both sides, but the Allied fleet refused to break, and the Perseverance kept killing hour after hour. The human vessel tore through the swarm fleet, destroying hundreds of enemies for every wound it received. The crew of 44 fought without rest, manning stations that should have required 10 times their number, pushing themselves beyond any reasonable limit. When one of them fell, another took their place. When a system failed, they found a way to work around it. When the situation seemed hopeless, they simply fought harder. 12 hours into the battle, the swarm fleet had lost over half its numbers. The Allied fleet had lost a third of its ships. But the rest still held formation around the Perseverance, and for the first time in recorded history, the swarm began to retreat. "They are running," Kethra reported, disbelief clear in her voice. "All ships. Pursue course, do not let them escape." The Allied fleet chased the broken swarm across the system, hunting down every vessel that tried to flee. By the time it was over, not a single enemy ship remained. The swarm was destroyed, not just defeated, but annihilated, wiped from existence as thoroughly as they had once wiped out countless civilizations before them. The Perseverance drifted in space, barely functional, its hull more scar tissue than original metal inside. The surviving humans gathered on the bridge, 31 of them now. 30 more lost in the final battle. Captain Chun stood at the center, surrounded by her crew and by holographic images of conclave captains whose ships had survived. "It is done," she said quietly. "The swarm is gone. The war is finally over." Silence fell over the fleet. Then, slowly, a sound began to build, cheering from conclave ships. Voices raised in celebration and relief and triumph, but the humans did not cheer. They simply held each other, exhausted and wounded, and finally, at long last, at peace. In the days that followed, the conclave began the long work of recovery. Ships were repaired, casualties were mourned, and the story of the battle spread to every corner of known space. The humans were offered whatever they wanted: worlds, resources, positions of honor, anything the grateful conclave could provide. Captain Chun asked for only one thing: a place to call home. She said, "Somewhere quiet, where we can build something new, somewhere we can finally rest." They were given a small continent on a beautiful world, far from the busy trade routes and political centers of the conclave. There, the last 31 humans began to build not weapons or defenses, but homes and gardens and schools. Ambassador Yellenori visited often, watching as the survivors of a dead civilization slowly learned to live again. One evening, she found Chun sitting on a hill overlooking the small settlement, watching the sunset. "What are you thinking?" Yellenori asked. Sitting beside her, Chun was quiet for a long moment. "I am thinking about everyone we lost," she said. 12 billion people who will never see this, who fought and died so that we could be here. Do you think they would be proud?" Chun smiled, and for the first time since Yellenori had,